Imagine living in a world where your voice is silenced, your opinion meaningless, and your future decided by a few of society's elite. This is the reality for most people in the world today, and it could become your reality sooner than you think. Freedom and democracy are in decline globally. According to Freedom House, tyranny has grown faster than democracy for 18 straight years. We're at a critical juncture. The rise of nationalist dictatorships has democracy under siege. But wait, hasn't China's economic miracle shown that authoritarianism can work? Haven't they lifted millions out of poverty and become a global superpower? Democracy may be dying. But does it even matter? Before we answer that, let's clarify what we mean by democracy. We're using the term broadly to mean any system with universal suffrage and strong democratic institutions, such as federal republics like the United States. Now, back to China. Its story teaches us a surprising lesson about democracy. We'll unpack that later. But first, let's take a look at why democracy is under threat. As China's rise inspires imitators, faith in democracy is wavering, even in the West. A recent study found that millennials in developed democracies are more disillusioned than any previous generation, with only 30% of those in the US considering democracy essential. This disillusionment stems largely from growing income inequality. In the US, inequality has reached levels not seen since the 20s, with the richest 1% owning almost a third of the country's wealth, while half the population owns just 2.6%. This stark divide leads many to question whether democracy is truly meeting everyone's needs. But these aren't inherent flaws of democracy, but areas where democratic systems need reform and improvement. Around the world, we're seeing more nationalistic, authoritarian leaders come to power. They offer simple solutions to complex problems, and they often blame minorities and outsiders for their country's issues. Authoritarian leaders have risen even in established democracies like Hungary, Turkey, Israel, and Italy. They are weakening courts and limiting press freedoms. These leaders often exploit people's fears about economic uncertainty, immigration, or changing cultural values. They claim that only they can protect the nation's identity and interests. But in reality, they chip away at the very democratic freedoms that allow citizens to shape their own future. But despite the allure of despots, democracy's value remains undeniable. Do you want to choose your own path in life? If so, you're already a democracy advocate. Freedoms of speech, assembly, and religion enable citizens to organize politically, express opinions, and hold their leaders accountable. Think of the simple freedoms you enjoy daily. Choosing what to wear, study, or vote for. In many countries, these choices don't exist. In China, you can't choose your religion or freely access the internet. In Saudi Arabia, women need a man's permission to travel. In Russia, criticizing the war in Ukraine can lead to 25 years in prison. These aren't just rules, they're chains that bind society. Democratic institutions like free elections and independent courts safeguard these liberties. That's why democratic countries often rank highest in individual freedoms. While these restrictions might seem extreme, even countries that are not fully authoritarian can suffocate their citizens. In Thailand, insulting the monarchy can land you in prison for up to 15 years. In Singapore, chewing gum is illegal. Egyptians need government permission to start a blog. These examples show that the absence of full democratic freedoms affects not just abstract political rights, but tangible aspects of everyday life. And it's not just the restrictions. Corruption is a daily reality in authoritarian regimes. Without accountability, rulers act with impunity. North Korea's Kim dynasty lives in opulence while millions starve. In Venezuela, President Maduro clings to power despite economic collapse and widespread hunger. In Russia, Vladimir Putin's increasingly authoritarian rule has coincided with economic stagnation. Since Putin came to power in 2000, Russia's GDP growth has averaged just 2.8% annually, compared with the global average of 4.5% for other emerging economies. These aren't isolated incidents, but the norm in systems without checks and balances. Some argue for a middle ground, technocracy, or rule by experts. It sounds appealing. Put the smartest people in the room and let them decide. But this is the path to tyranny. Even the world's most brilliant minds can't possibly anticipate the diverse needs of millions. China's Great Leap Forward, conceived by educated officials, resulted in a famine that killed millions. This catastrophe illustrates how even well-intentioned experts can make disastrous decisions without democratic checks and balances. In contrast, democracies have built-in safeguards. They may be slower, but they're more responsive and more stable. Leaders face regular elections, media scrutiny, and checks from other branches of government. This system prevents missteps and better addresses the complex needs of a diverse population. And democracy can literally save lives, as India's experience demonstrates. Before independence, India suffered frequent famines under British authoritarian rule, with the Bengal famine of 1943 killing an estimated 2 to 3 million people. But since gaining independence and embracing democracy in 1947, India hasn't experienced a single famine despite severe droughts. This is in stark contrast to the Great Chinese Famine of the late 50s. India's free press and electoral accountability forced leaders to respond swiftly to food shortages, averting widespread hunger. Beyond responsiveness, democracies offer another clear advantage. In authoritarian countries, it's often who you know, not what you know. In contrast, democracies foster meritocracy. This is clear in the realm of innovation and entrepreneurship. In the United States, for example, 55% of billion-dollar startups were founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. This diversity and openness to talent, regardless of background, is a hallmark of democratic societies. In contrast, in more authoritarian systems, you would have a hard time launching your next great idea without political connections. Now, let's return to China. Its economic boom began in the late 1970s when Deng Xiaoping introduced market reforms, allowing more economic freedom. This opening led to decades of double-digit growth. So China's success story is not about the victory of authoritarianism, but about the power of freedom. And recent years have seen China's gains slow down as Xi Jinping has tightened his authoritarian grip. Economic growth has slowed significantly, with GDP growth falling from 14% in 2007 to 3% in 2022. This slowdown coincides with increased state control over private enterprises, restrictions on foreign investments, and a general tightening of political control. China's experience demonstrates a crucial point. In the long term, you can never have sustainable economic freedom without political freedom. The benefits of democracy are clear and measurable. Since 1945, there has been no wars between democratic nations. Zero. Now imagine a world where everyone lived in a democracy. An MIT study found that democracy increases GDP by 20% long term, which has a compound effect on quality of life over time. Consider the case of the two Koreas. The democratic South has a GDP per capita of over $31,000, while the authoritarian North is less than $2,000. In education, standardized test scores show students in democratic countries significantly outperform students in authoritarian regimes. Democratic societies have longer life expectancies, lower infant mortality rates, and better healthcare systems. The average life expectancy in high-income democracies is 80 years, compared to 71 in high-income autocracies. Democracy isn't flawless. As Winston Churchill famously said, it's the worst system, except every other system that's been tried. Some say democracy is slow to act on big issues like climate change. Others point to political gridlock and the influence of money in politics as weaknesses. Look, these are valid concerns, but they're not fatal flaws. Democratic nations have led on climate change, driven by engaged citizens. Political debates, while messy, ensure all voices are heard. And many democratic nations are working on the issue of money in politics. Most importantly, democracy gives us the freedom to discuss these issues openly and work toward solutions. Authoritarian systems may seem efficient, but they achieve this by suppressing dissent. Democracies, on the other hand, have built-in mechanisms for self-improvement, making them more adaptable to complex challenges. And it's not just democracy that matters, but the strength of democracy. Consider the town of Nogales, as Dayron Ajamalu did in his breakthrough book, Why Nations Fail. The town straddles the US-Mexico border and provides a striking illustration of how democratic institutions impact prosperity. Despite shared geography and culture, the American side boasts significantly higher incomes, better health care, lower crime rates, and superior infrastructure. The book argues the disparity stems from the stark difference in democratic institutions. The US side benefits from fair and open systems for business and government that encourage investment, innovation, and broad economic participation. This real-world example demonstrates how democratic institutions with strong checks and balances can create dramatically better economic outcomes, even in otherwise identical settings. The benefits of democracy are clear. But are some cultures just incompatible with democracy? Well, a recent Pew Research study found the desire for democracy is universal. Pew found that across 34 countries, 78% of people believe in representative democracy as the best form of government. This sentiment is strong even in countries with authoritarian governments. For example, the study found high support for democracy in Lebanon at 89%, Iraq with 68, and Tunisia with 67. This shows democracy is most coveted by the people who don't have it. This channel is filled with stories of people enduring incredible hardships and risking their lives for the rights we take for granted. Democracy isn't just about numbers or money. It's about human dignity and human potential. It's about waking up every day knowing you're free to speak your mind, practice your faith, or reach towards your goals without restrictions. It prevents the unchecked power that led to Stalin's purges and Pol Pot's killing fields. Democracy isn't just a system of government. It's a safeguard of human rights and a catalyst for human potential.